Dr. Mark Changizi here with your Science Moment. We are on Science Moment number 200. This is a big deal for me. When I started this Science Moment series, it was really aimed to be about my research and research areas that are sort of have an affinity to the kinds of things that I've worked on or that I'm working on. And when COVID hit, I was on 52, Science Moment number 52. And then I just stopped for 6 or 7 months. I was online on Twitter, spending lots of time sort of fighting the hysteria and the craziness and all the irrational reactions. And I didn't know really how to go forward with this series because it just felt weird to continue talking about just sort of interesting areas of science when all of this stuff, the world was being turned upside down. And so I eventually realized that, no, there's so much interesting stuff going on in terms of how networks work and how free expression works within these networks and how censorship ruins all of that, and face masks and emotional expressions and all of these kinds of psychosocietal issues that eventually we started the Free Expression Research Group devoted to studying these deeply exciting and interesting and appalling, in some sense, phenomena that occur at the level of the society. So now, from 53 up to this Science Moment number 200, we're nearly 150 episodes in this endless COVID hysteria season. And I'm going to open it up now, from now on, to at least start opening it up and feeling that it's okay to talk about other kinds of areas of science. But still, our current research at freex.group is about these kinds of collective hysterias, mass hysterias, how free expression works and works well, what kinds of conditions need to be there in the network such that free expression can work as it's supposed to and is less susceptible to mass hysterias that sweep through, and what are the ways in which censorship, whether it's government censorship or private company censorship or intolerance amongst the populace, how do these things affect and hurt the functioning, the normal functioning of these networks upon which we rely to slowly find the truth, and that freedom relies on. So what I wanted to do, one, it's an announcement that it's number 200. Two, I'm going to open it up to different kinds of research areas that I've worked on in the past, things that I'm interested in, and there will still be disproportionately about some of these issues because those are the issues that still are now driving me. And I wanted to talk just briefly in this episode about the importance of freedom and free expression and the dangers that are new for us in this modern age. And what we've seen in the last 2 years is the first instance of this. So individuals from culture to culture have just as much likelihood of being crazy, and just from one county to another, from one country. We're all have great variability in terms of how rational we are individually. But that's the same across, the same variability we find all over the place. But historically, what makes your life a good life or a bad life is determined not by how crazy you are. Of course, it does. But in terms of how good a society is determined not really by the spectrum of crazinesses of the individuals, because it's always the same. What determines the nature, how good your life is determined by how crazy the network is. And how crazy the network, or how sick versus healthy the network is something that we don't really understand. This is what, again, we're trying to understand it at freex.group. We're trying to understand exactly what makes a social network healthy. In what ways did we evolve to have networks that in fact works, to build the kinds of reputation networks such that over time they tend to inhibit waves of collective hysteria in groupthink, that they tend to lead towards the truth. These are the kinds of things that we talk about in Express the Human, which is coming out next month, the new book by Tim Barber and I. We historically didn't understand these things, and so what would happen would be in various locales, thousands of locales all over the earth, people experimented. They experimented with different kinds of social networks, with different kinds of rules, and with different kinds of cultural traditions, which would just end up occurring, led to less sick and more sick, or just variations in terms of how healthy the social network is in those various countries. And what we know historically is that the ones that end up healthy where you have freedom and people feel free, and it promotes free markets where people can have the kinds of wealth that we're now comfortable with, was rare. It's rare to find that. It's still rare to find that in the world even today. It's still rare to find that. And most of the world doesn't have an appreciation for free expression, even in the West. The kind of attachment that 50%, let's say, or some minority even of the United States has towards free expression is still rare in places like the UK and Australia. They'll sometimes just blink their eyes. The experiments historically were such that finding ones that were healthy, social networks that were healthy, was hard to find. It is not something to be taken for granted to expect these things to last forever. That is, when you find them, we want to grab on to what we have. So like, this seems to work pretty well compared to all of these others. And we don't know how it works so well here. We have some ideas, but one needs to understand that. So where's the danger that I mentioned? The danger is that whereas before we had thousands of experiments, and most of those experiments were in some sense failures. They ended up with either tyranny or just crazy ideas and sort of authoritarian or total, just all of these different ways that societies can go bad. There was just thousands of different discoveries of ways they could be unhealthy by virtue of the nature and the rules and structures of the networks as they found themselves. But now we just have one network. The world is just one network, all connected. And so when something sick happened to the network, we had collective hysteria not just mess up some village in Eastern Europe or in the outback in some part of the world. No, it didn't just envelop a country or a continent. It enveloped the entire world. These experiments now, the danger is that these experiments, when they happen, when social networks become ill, as they are, they're not as healthy as they should be because they're not really having the full range of properties, as I've been arguing and we argue at FreeX, that they need to have to work well as reputation networks that can learn, in some sense over time, the truths of the world. We only have one now. So whereas 90% or 99% of the experiments of these social networks ended up to be sick because no one knew what they were doing, it's just sort of trying different things. Well, now we only have one. That's one experiment, and it's going to go wrong. It's much more important now, more than ever, to figure out which kinds of social network structures work. What ways does society have to be structured such that these kinds of collective hysterias don't drive and rip through? Because it's exactly those kinds of hysterias, when they rip through, that on the backs of those hysterias, they install authoritarian dictators. They install centralized governments with powers that then worsen it and only encourage it. These are the things that have made life terrible in all the countries where life is terrible. It's almost always due to these sorts of sweeps, these sorts of movements that move in a sick way across the networks. So, although I'll allow, in some sense, and not feel guilty for starting to talk about other stuff. Life needs to move on, and so we're going to talk about other sorts of things. But in much of the world today, they're still grappling with a draconian losses of freedom and bodily autonomy and free expression and civil rights in much of the world, in Canada and Australia and various parts of the world. Is still, poor China, still grappling with this. And so we are still going to be talking about this because it's still active. And even if they were all much better and pre-2020 state, we now know how quickly these things can envelop the world now that we're all connected, and we need to continue thinking about that. So thank you all the subscribers here on YouTube and those on Rumble and Odyssey and Instagram that have been following me for the last few years and dealing with the change of tone. When the world changed, the science moment had to change, but I thank you for taking this journey with me, and ready for Science Moment 201 next. And that was your Science Moment.